I've had the HEDDphone D1 for almost 3 weeks now, and I think it's past time to give my first impressions. I'll follow up in a week or two with a full review, so stay posted if you're interested. Okay, let's go. So far, my impressions of the D1 have been a story in 3 acts. Act 1. I got the headphones about a week after launch. I plugged them into my FiiO KA17 dongle, which I consider a modest but good source, and it was off to the races. Immediately, the D1 sounded extremely neutral. The bass isn't elevated, but it did have definition, and the headphones' dynamics and punch were greater than I expected. The only immediate red flag I noticed was that the D1 was a little brighter than I expected, to be honest, based both on the impressions and the measurements that I'd seen. But still, I was impressed. After the first couple days, 5 days in, 10 days in, the question I was asking myself was, are these headphones boring? Because they're just so neutral. And the neutrality makes the D1 sound really clean, but a synonym for clean might also be sterile. And spoilers, I don't think the D1 is spoiler, but I did find myself, just listening to a wide variety of music, hitting shuffle on all my songs. And the D1 always sounded good. Occasionally it would sound really good, but there were a lot of tracks where it just wasn't quite doing it for me. And I found myself wondering why. So, Act 3. This is where I think things start to get pretty interesting. And I think, after, probably about 2 weeks in, I started to get a feel for what I really like about the D1 and the reasons why I might keep listening to the D1. So when the D1 was announced, a lot of the focus was on the driver material used for it. For good reason, because it's a first in headphones. The D1 uses a thin ply carbon for the diaphragm material. I'm not the kind of person to understand on a technical level what that means exactly, but it's a cool material. It gets used by NASA, and it's in the marketing for the headphone, and for good reason. We can't really say what it means for the sound specifically, because it's not like we have a version of the D1 without thin ply carbon. But I could talk about sort of what I hear from the headphone. And sort of the defining feature of it for me, the thing that stands out, is the bass. Because while it doesn't have perfect full extension like a planar, there is a really nice decay to the bass, and there's a real sense of fullness and presence. I've seen people describe this headphone as warm, and oddly enough, despite it initially sounding a little bright to me, the more I listen, the more I sort of see why you would call it warm, because there's just such a presence in the bass. And I don't want to say it sounds thick, because that gives the entirely wrong impression of a bass boosted headphone. But the thing I think I would really emphasize about this is just the quality of the bass for a neutrally tuned headphone. There's headphones whose bass I prefer and love versus this, but none of those headphones are neutral like the D1 is. So to have a neutral headphone that also has this really full and rich bass presence is, I think, pretty unique. And the more I've listened, that's what stands out to me about the D1. But there's sort of a complication to that. So that comes through on the D1 stock to some degree. But it comes through more if you do one of two things. And the first thing some people just won't do, and that's totally fine, but it's parametric EQ. So particularly after, the first week, most of my listening to the D1 has been with parametric EQ and a bass boost. And I'll put that on screen. I don't have any other EQ. The mid-range, I haven't touched it. The treble, I haven't touched it. But I added a bass shelf, and I think the D1 definitely becomes more fun with that. But that's not the only route you can take. The other route you can take is source pairing. A warmer source. This is the Cayenne RU9, and it is a tube dongle deck. It's not on, it's not lit up, but you can see sort of these grills where the tubes are. They're this kind of tube called a new tube, I believe. And it has several modes. One of the modes is a classic mode with no global feedback, and actually about 3% distortion or so, which sounds like a lot, but in terms of what's like you actually hear when music is playing, like it doesn't sound distorted. It just sounds a little warm and sort of rich and organic. And this, with the D1, is definitely my favorite source pairing that I've tried. So, parametric EQ, sort of one route. A warmer source, like the kind of like another route. So, what's my conclusion? I don't have one. This is just an impressions video. I'm still listening, I'm still making up my mind. But that's what I think so far. And for the full review, I want to dive into some comparisons, which I haven't really done yet. I've actually compared the D1 to more expensive headphones, but I haven't really compared it to others in the same bracket. So for the full review, you can look for comparisons to the Aria Stealth, which is about $600 these days regularly, and the Meze 109 Pro, which retails for $800. So that's, a lower priced headphone, a higher priced headphone, a planar, and also another dynamic. And I think comparisons to those will start to get a good idea for how the D1 fits into the current headphone market. So that's it. That's all I got. Thanks. I'm out. See you in the next one. Goodbye.